Hi everyone, it's William. It's the third day of this head cold that I've gotten, but I am going to try to make it through without getting distracted. This is the 1921 diary series, by the way, and we have a very amusing diary entry today. It is the 3rd of February, which made it the 21st of February on the Western calendar in Hamburg, where this Crispin! Sorry. I was hoping there would be no distractions, but my little dog. Anyway, okay, what was I saying? Yeah, so that made it the 21st of February on the Western calendar. And 1921, of course, it was a Thursday, and this time we get a little additional detail about Hamburg and some of the things that I guess Dmitri didn't have time or overlooked when he was doing his long diary entry, and he goes back to his very meticulous habit of always giving some kind of precise location. So in this case, he tells us that he is at the Palace Hotel in room 152. All right, so let us dive in. I arrived in Hamburg around 9 o'clock in the morning. When I got off at the station, I found out that the Copenhagen train had departed and I would have to spend 24 hours in Hamburg. So I set off to find a hotel, and naturally I tried the Atlantic first, but they didn't have any vacancies. After having tried 2 other places, I finally secured a room with a bath and a room for my man at the Palace. A very amusing exchange then took place with the senior porter, who, when giving me a police form to fill out, asked if I was a spy, because he took me for an American or an Englishman. When I told him I was Russian, he changed his attitude completely and called some other staff members to come have a look at dieser russische Prinz. It turned out that what he calls spies are those officers of the Entente who travel around Germany overseeing the surrender of military materials. I spent all morning writing, and around 1 o'clock took a bath and had lunch alone at the hotel. Afterwards, I went for a ride and, incidentally, took some kind of package at Axel Wichfeld's request. During my ride, the taxi driver stopped and showed me places of interest. Incidentally, he stopped in front of a nondescript villa and said that that was where Emperor Wilhelm stayed during his final visit to Hamburg. At home, I did some more writing, and after an early dinner, went to the Hansa Theater. I wrote down my impressions of that experience previously on page 106. Okay, so let's take a look at this. He goes to the Atlantic first. I guess he knew a little something about what were the best hotels in various European cities, even if he hadn't been to those cities before. Or maybe he just asked someone at the train station or the cab driver, but at any rate, he knows that the Atlantic is the premier hotel at that time in Hamburg. So I had to have a look at it online. It still exists. The Palace does not, but the Atlantic does, and it's still regarded as this sort of glittering, this hotel, grand hotel with a glittering past. And in fact, there was a James Bond scenes from a James Bond movie. Scenes for a James Bond movie were filmed at the Atlantic, and it would also be the British headquarters in Hamburg from 1945 to 1950. So, interesting place. If you happen to be in Hamburg or are going there, well, I mean, you know, Dmitri didn't actually stay there, so it's not really a spot on any kind of Dmitri tour. But he finds, so why was Hamburg so full? Why were the hotels so full, you know, at the end of February 1921? I don't know, but only after trying 3 places. does he finally get a room at the Palace Hotel with a bath and a room for Savonia, or as he puts it actually in English, a room for my man. I don't know why he stops and uses English there. But anyway, it may have been that they didn't have a sort of first-class room at the Atlantic and the other hotels, or it may have been that they didn't have any rooms at all, but anyway, he finally does find himself a room with a bath. It sounds like just one room and something for Savonia. And then he has this comical exchange with the senior porter at the Palace Hotel, who just flat out asks him if he's a spy. And yeah, so that's funny. Now, it's not unusual for Dmitri to be mistaken for an Englishman on his travels. I think this is the only time I know of where he was mistaken possibly for an American, but it seems like he was rather frequently mistaken for an Englishman. He'd been living in London for about a year and a half before he moved to Paris, and he'd gone to English tailors, and yeah, so I guess his English that he'd learned, that he'd spoken since the time he was just a little guy, had been British English, of course. So anyway, when he informs them that he's a Russian, he sees this immediate change in attitude, and you don't have the same level of resentment, clearly, of a Russian as opposed to an American or an Englishman, because there is no Russian occupation of any part of Germany. And Russia is not they weren't a signatory to the Versailles Treaty, and they're not a part of this whole humiliation of Germany. And so, certain things always surprise me when I read these that don't sort of quite jibe with my assumptions, I guess, probably naive assumptions, I guess, about what life was like for a Grand Duke. And for one thing, that you couldn't walk into any hotel and say, here I am, Grand Duke Dmitri, and they would clear out whatever guests were currently in the presidential suite or whatever, Maybe that would have been the case before the revolution, but definitely it's not after the revolution. And in this instance, this head porter doesn't hesitate to call his underlings, to come and have a look at this Russian prince. So, Dmitri takes it all in stride. Any of you who have been following along with the 1907 diary entries will recall the scene on the street in Moscow where he's out for a walk with General Laming, and boys are pointing at him. They're running up and pointing at him because he interprets it as being because he's wearing a horse guard's uniform, which one usually didn't see in Moscow. But anyway, yeah, I guess people, I have no idea what it's like to be a celebrity, but I guess maybe then it's now. We're not talking about paparazzi, but we're talking about just ordinary people who have no scruples about kind of gathering around to gawk. Okay, so this is, it's quite funny. So this man uses the word spy to mean these British and American and maybe French, I don't know, these Entente officers who travel around Germany and make sure that military materials are turned over. And so these were clearly not popular people in Germany. Okay, then he goes back and does more writing, takes his bath, has lunch. And if you recall, the last time he talked about Hamburg, he was more focused on what information he was able to get from people about their attitudes towards other countries and towards systems of government. And he mentions the taxi driver that he talked to. So, yeah, what do? You've got 24 hours to spend in a city with nothing to do. He basically decides to take a taxi tour of the city. And so the place that one place in particular that the driver shows him that interests him is this, what he calls an insignificant or nondescript villa, because that was where Emperor Wilhelm stayed during his final visit to Hamburg. And I have to admit, I was too lazy to look up to try and figure out when Wilhelm's last visit to Hamburg would have been, and if what is meant by this is that when he was en route to leave the country and go to the Netherlands, or whether it was before or during the war. Anyway, he was staying in this villa. I'm sure one could figure out what villa that was, if in fact the story is true. But why wouldn't it be? And for some reason, Dmitri just loves this expression, между прочим, incidentally, or by the way. And I need to remember that as I'm writing my book, that I need to remember that and have Dmitri use that expression, because he uses it constantly in his diary, even when it doesn't seem quite apt. And he uses it, whether he used it in speech or not, I don't know. But the funny thing is that he also misspells it every time. So I'm working now with two Russian historians, two historians in Russia, that is, and we just had an exchange about Dmitri's Russian. And I told them that I've shown his Russian to friends, native-speaking Russian friends in the U.S. and elsewhere, and to, for one being David Chavchavadze, the grandson of Grand Duke George Mikhailovich. And, they always say that they find it a bit strange. And Natasha and Alexandra said, no, it's, it's quite normal, proper Russian, except that he likes these sort of poetic turns of phrase. He likes to use complicated words and sentences, and his spelling is horrible. And, so that was, not being a native Russian speaker, that was very useful to me. That was very valuable. And of course, one thing I absolutely already knew was that his spelling is horrible. But this particular phrase he learned so often, you think he would have learned to spell it. He spells the word prochim is Prochim in Latin letters, and he always puts a D in there. But anyway, that is quite a lengthy aside. Sorry about that. So then this very mysterious thing happens, and he's writing it in ambiguous terms. I'll have to ask Alexandra and Natasha what they make of it. He says that he took some kind of package at Axel Wichfeld's request. So the verb he uses could mean that what he's saying is that he took the package with him in the vehicle, but, what would that be? He wasn't supposed to stop in Hamburg, and he hasn't mentioned earlier that Axel Wichfeld gave him a package. Now, Axel Wichfeld was Danish, and Dmitri is on his way to Denmark. So why would this take place in Hamburg, which was a completely unscheduled stop? He was literally supposed to arrive at the station in Hamburg and get off and walk across the platform to another train. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, now the Wichfeld family did have some espionage connections. So Axel's sister, I believe it was, not his wife Mabel, whom we know, but his sister Monica, she was involved in espionage during the Second World War. anti-German espionage. But this is long before that, and Axel himself was a diplomat. He was at the Danish embassy in London. That was, in fact, where he was employed at the time that this was written in 1921. But anyway, it's quite mysterious. If any of you have any information or knowledge about that from any quarter, of course, I would be delighted to hear it. So, yeah, he goes to the Hansa Theater. And I thought it was the Hansa Theater. Excuse me a minute. I thought it was the Hansa Theater because initially he refers to it as the Variety Theater. And when I looked it up, I couldn't find a variety theater, but I did find the Hansa Theater, which had variety acts and variety shows. And so I thought, well, that must be it. But I didn't mention it because, yeah, I didn't have any confirmation of that. But now he mentions it by name. Like the Atlantic Hotel, it's one of the landmarks of Hamburg, I gather, and a celebrated place. And so if I was in Hamburg, I would definitely go to see it. And I have to say, that's one of the things over the years that I've been working on Dmitri's diaries and letters and various things. And yes, it has been years, I'm ashamed to say. But over the course of time, I have learned so much about so many different things and places. And I want to go to Hamburg one of these days very much. I have friends from Hamburg, although they all live in Switzerland now. And when I go there, eventually, this will be, will add to the fun a little bit, right? To see the places that Dmitri saw and to think about what things were like there in 1921 and to see if anybody asks me if I'm a spy. That probably won't happen. But I did have a funny incident back when I was a student at the University of London. It was honestly my first time going abroad except Canada, and I was there, and it was rather intimidating, to be living in London and to be at the university there as a graduate student. And I had a fellow student that I kind of hit it off with, who was from an aristocratic German family. And I tried to sort of model myself on him as young people will when they're kind of adrift and don't know how to fit in to their environment. So I went off to Harrods, and I simply asked a clerk there to help me choose clothes, just an entire outfit, a sports coat, pants, a tie, everything that would go with it, shirts. And she did. She was very, very helpful. And then when I was flying home to the U.S. for the summer holiday, I think, I wore that whole get-up on the plane, and I was walking down the aisle, and there were these U.S. service members, and one of them nudged his buddy who was sitting next to him and said, "Yeah, look at that. That's a German nobleman. That's a German aristocrat." And I was so thrilled with that. I was absolutely so thrilled with that. Now I look back and think it's silly. But yeah, sometimes it is fun to be mistaken for something a little more glamorous than what you actually are. But of course, as it turned out, this porter was not really mistaking Dmitri for some kind of James Bond spy, but just for an officer, just for a British officer, an American officer, even though he wasn't wearing a uniform, Dmitri, that is. So the last little thing, I've been chattering too much, thank you for indulging me with that, but the last little thing that I thought was funny in this diary entry, and also of interest is the fact that when he tells us that he's already written about his stay in Hamburg, he adds this information that it is on page 106. So Dmitri does his very careful and meticulous, not only adding his address every time he is in Paris. We now know by heart that he lived at 76 Rue Miromesnil in Paris, and he always tells us his the number of his hotel room and so on and so forth. And this time he's giving us a page number so that we can refer back to that. So was this just kind of his almost OCD-ish sort of need to have things ordered in a particular way, or was it an example of one of the times when, as he was writing, he was thinking about posterity? He was thinking about somebody reading his diaries later and how this might be helpful for them. Or maybe it was a reminder to himself. Maybe he thought that at some point he was going to write memoirs, and if he needed to refer back to something, he could find the page number. So, yeah, maybe. Good thinking, I guess. I was just talking with Alexander and Natasha about that subject of memoirs and why Dmitri didn't write memoirs when so many people around him did. Sandro did, and Maria did, and Yusupov did, and he did not. And it seems like he would have been a natural at it. But to be honest, I'm so much more. I'm happier that we have this really intimate look at him, because memoirs are not intimate, and they're full of little untruths and things like that, and they're very carefully crafted and edited. And in this instance, we get the real Dmitri. So, yeah, it would have been nice if there were both memoirs and diaries, but if I had to choose between the two, I would definitely choose the diaries. So, yeah, that's it for today. Come back to see what our friend is up to tomorrow, and I'll give you a little bit of a hint, which is he's going to find it very difficult to cross the border from Germany to Denmark, because the border control there is so strict and stringent. So yeah, difficult is the wrong word, just that it will be very inconvenient. And anyway, so I shouldn't say tomorrow, because I'm sort of alternating now, doing every other day. One day the 1921 diaries, and the next day the 1907 diary entries. But yeah, so 2 days from now, come back and we'll join Dmitri at the border of Germany and Denmark. All right, bye.